The call came in the middle of a negotiation. A broken, gasping voice cutting through the tension of a dozen armed men waiting for orders. "Sir Thomas, please come home. She's not breathing. She's—" A sob strangled the rest. Thomas Albury knew the sound of fear. He'd built an empire on reading voices, detecting lies, sensing danger in the shift of a man's weight. But this voice, Michelle Wright's voice, was shaking with a terror that shot ice straight through his chest. He didn't wait for details. He didn't excuse himself from the table. He ran. He arrived at the mansion in under 7 minutes. The moment he pushed through the heavy doors, the wrongness hit him like a physical force. No piano music drifting from the parlor. No television cartoons echoing down the hall. No sound of Lily's footsteps racing to greet him. Just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. And somewhere deeper in the house, the sound of someone crying. Michelle. Thomas moved down the corridor, each step deliberate, his pulse hammering in his ears. The maid appeared in a doorway, uniform disheveled, phone clutched in trembling hands, her face streaked with tears. She tried to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Only a choked sound, a gesture toward the living room, and then he saw it. He froze. His daughter, Lily, the center of his entire world, was on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, small hands shaking, gasping for air that wouldn't come, tears streaming down her pale face. A shattered white vase lay in pieces around her, porcelain glinting like broken teeth, and there was Amy Valenzuela, his partner, the elegant, composed woman he'd trusted with his home, with his heart, with his daughter. She wasn't kneeling beside Lily trying to help. She wasn't calling for a doctor or comforting the child. She was striding across the room in her sharp navy suit, fury twisting her perfect features as if she were the one who'd been wronged. Thomas had seen murders, betrayals, executions carried out in cold blood. He'd orchestrated violence that would haunt lesser men for lifetimes. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of the woman he'd brought into his home standing over his gasping daughter with rage instead of concern. In that moment, a truth detonated in his mind with the force of a gunshot. The enemy he'd been guarding against on the streets, the danger he'd built walls to keep out, had been living under his roof all along. If you're already feeling that knot in your chest wondering how this ends, you're not alone. This story gets darker before it gets better. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what Thomas discovers next, because what Michelle has been hiding will change everything. Let's continue. Thomas Albury wasn't just any businessman. He was the man who controlled half the city's underground. Politicians returned his calls within minutes. Cops looked the other way when his name surfaced in reports. Rival families knew better than to test the boundaries of his territory. Men didn't cross Thomas Albury and walk away whole. But at home, he was simply Dad, a father who loved his daughter more than he loved breathing. Lily was everything to him. After losing his wife in crossfire meant for him, Thomas had sworn an oath over her tiny crib. "No one will ever touch you because of me again." He'd built fortress walls around their estate, hired the best security money and fear could buy, installed cameras, alarms, armed guards at every entrance. He made certain no enemy could reach her. What he'd never imagined was that the deadliest threat wouldn't come from outside those walls. Amy Valenzuela had entered their lives 3 years ago, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She was sophisticated, worldly, unshaken by the darker edges of his world. She made Lily laugh again after years of grief-stricken silence. She brought warmth back into rooms that had felt cold since his wife's death. Thomas watched his broken little girl smile, heard her giggles echo through halls that had known only quiet sorrow. Amy had seemed like a second chance. A miracle neither of them deserved, but both desperately needed. But miracles, Thomas was about to discover, sometimes wear masks. And the price of trusting the wrong person could destroy everything he'd bled to protect. The maid who'd called him that afternoon was Michelle Wright. She'd been with the Albury household for 6 years, watching Lily grow from a grieving toddler into a bright, curious child. Michelle had seen everything in this house, the late-night calls, the briefcases of cash, the men who came and went like shadows. She knew what Thomas was, what he did, the blood on his hands, but she'd never been afraid. Not until she saw what happened behind closed doors when Thomas left for work. It started small. Amy's tone would sharpen the moment Thomas's car pulled out of the driveway. She criticized Lily's posture, her table manners, the way she held a pencil. She called her hobbies childish, her questions annoying, her laughter disruptive. Michelle noticed the changes, how Lily would flinch when Amy entered a room, how the girl's bright chatter became hesitant, cautious, how her laughter grew quieter, rarer, until it disappeared altogether. Then the rules began. No running in the house, no loud voices, no crying when Daddy left for business. Lily was to be perfect, silent, invisible. A porcelain figure on display but never touched, never heard. Michelle tried to intervene gently. She suggested that children needed room to play, to explore, to simply be children. Amy's response was glacial and immediate. "You're here to clean, Michelle, not to parent. Stay in your lane." The warning was clear. But Michelle couldn't turn away from what she was witnessing. Lily was changing. The vibrant child was withdrawing into herself, nervous, constantly seeking Amy's approval with wide, anxious eyes. Michelle started documenting everything. Photos of bruises on Lily's wrists where Amy had grabbed too hard. Audio recordings of Amy's voice dripping venom. Worthless, stupid, burden, mistake. Every time Michelle tried to voice her concerns to Thomas, Amy was there first with perfectly reasonable explanations. Lily was going through a difficult phase, testing boundaries. She needed structure, discipline, consistency. Thomas, exhausted from managing his empire and still drowning in grief, wanted to believe his partner had everything under control. He trusted Amy completely, grateful she'd taken on the challenge of raising another woman's child. What Thomas didn't know was that Amy had never wanted a family. She'd wanted power, status, control. She'd wanted to be queen of Thomas Alberry's empire, the only woman who mattered in his world. And Lily, sweet, innocent Lily, was the one obstacle standing between Amy and absolute dominion over Thomas's heart. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn. Thomas was across the city locked in negotiations that could determine whether blood would spill on the docks that night. His phone was silenced, his focus razor-sharp on strategies and contingencies. At home, Lily was working on a drawing in the living room, a picture of her father, her late mother, and Amy, all holding hands. She wanted it to be perfect. She wanted to show her dad that they could be a real family. She never saw the white vase until it was too late. To understand how Thomas Albery missed the threat living under his own roof, you had to understand the two worlds he occupied and how desperately he tried to keep them separate. In the city, Thomas was a ghost that cast shadows. He ran an empire built on fear, loyalty, and calculated violence. When he called, city council members answered before the second ring. When his name appeared in police reports, those reports had a way of disappearing. Rival families knew the boundaries of his territory, the way sailors knew reefs crossed them, and you didn't come back whole. Men who'd committed murder without flinching would cross the street rather than make eye contact with Thomas Albery. But at home, in the sprawling estate behind iron gates and armed guards, he was simply Dad. There were mornings he'd wake at dawn to make Lily pancakes shaped like stars. Evenings he'd abandon conference calls to watch cartoons sprawled on the living room floor. His daughter curled against his chest, giggling at talking animals. Nights he'd read her stories until his voice went hoarse, just to hear her breathing slow into sleep. Everything he did, every wall he built, every precaution he took, stemmed from one shattering moment 5 years ago. The day Lily's mother died. Catherine had been caught in crossfire, meant for Thomas, a hit ordered by a rival family, executed in broad daylight outside a cafe where she'd been waiting for him. 3 bullets, one intended for his chest, found hers instead. Thomas had held her as she bled out on the sidewalk, whispering promises he couldn't keep, while their 3-year-old daughter sat strapped in a car seat 15 feet away, too young to understand why Mommy wouldn't wake up. The guilt nearly destroyed him. He'd disappeared into it for months, barely functional, while Michelle Wright, the young maid who'd worked for them only a year, quietly kept Lily fed, bathed, alive. When Thomas finally surfaced from the wreckage of his grief, he made a vow over Lily's crib, his hand resting on her sleeping form. "No one will ever touch you because of me again." He rebuilt his world as a fortress, gated estate with 12-foot walls, state-of-the-art security systems monitoring every inch of the property, armed guards rotating shifts around the clock, a private doctor on retainer, always 15 minutes away. He vetted every person who came within 100 yards of his daughter. He built layers of protection so thick, so impenetrable, he convinced himself nothing could reach her. Then, 3 years ago, Amy Valenzuela walked into his life. Thomas had needed someone to help polish the legitimate side of his operations, someone who could navigate charity galas and business dinners without flinching at the darkness underneath. Amy was perfect. Sophisticated, worldly, unbothered by whispered rumors about where his money came from. She moved through his world with elegant confidence, as if organized crime were just another industry to master. But what sold Thomas completely was watching her with Lily. The first time Amy made his daughter laugh, really laugh. The kind of pure giggle Lily hadn't managed since her mother died. Something in Thomas's chest cracked open. Amy didn't treat Lily like a burden or an obstacle. She asked about her drawings, learned her favorite songs, sat through endless tea parties with stuffed animals without a trace of condescension. Slowly, carefully, Thomas let her in. Dinners where Lily sat between them, chattering about school, while Amy and Thomas exchanged warm glances over her head. Bedtime stories where Amy did all the character voices, making Lily dissolve into helpless giggles. Inside jokes that made his daughter feel included, special, loved. For the first time since Catherine's death, Thomas began to believe his daughter could have a complete family again. He trusted Amy with his most vulnerable spot, his child. What Thomas didn't realize was that Michelle Wright, the quiet maid who'd been there since the beginning, saw things differently. Michelle had been present for Lily's first steps, her first words, her first day of school. She'd held the little girl through nightmares about the mother she barely remembered. She'd watched Thomas claw his way back from grief and guilt to become a father again. Michelle loved Lily like her own child. But she also knew her place in the household hierarchy. She was the help, not family. And her observations carried less weight than Amy's polished reassurances. So when small things began to feel wrong, Michelle kept her concerns to herself. For a while, Thomas believed he'd done everything right. He'd built walls to keep the monsters out, vetted everyone who came near his daughter, created a sanctuary where she could grow up safe despite his sins. He'd found someone who seemed to love Lily almost as much as he did. Someone who could give his daughter the maternal presence she desperately needed. He'd strengthened his fortress from every angle. What he'd never considered was that the greatest threat wouldn't scale the walls or sneak past the guards. It would walk through the front door wearing a smile, invited in by Thomas himself. Michelle Wright had worked in enough households to recognize when something was off. But at first, with Amy, everything seemed perfect. Those early months, Amy would appear in the kitchen while Michelle prepared meals, offering to help chop vegetables or set the table. She'd compliment Michelle's cooking, ask about her family, treat her like a person rather than invisible staff. With Lily, she was even better patient during homework struggles, enthusiastic about art projects, genuinely interested in the elaborate fantasy worlds an 8-year-old could conjure. Michelle had allowed herself to hope, to believe that Thomas had finally found someone worthy of his trust. The shift was so gradual, Michelle almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. It started with tone. The warmth in Amy's voice would cool the moment Thomas's car pulled away from the estate. Requests became commands. Suggestions became corrections. Michelle noticed it first during breakfast one morning, 3 months after Amy moved in. Lily, sit up straight. You look like a rag doll. Don't chew with your mouth open. It's disgusting. That shirt is wrinkled. Go change. Now. Lily had obeyed without question, her smile faltering just slightly. Michelle told herself it was normal. Adults taught children manners. Nothing sinister about that. But then came the rules. No running in the house. No loud voices. Ever. No messes, no matter how small. No talking when Thomas was on phone calls, even if he was 3 rooms away. No babyish hobbies. Lily's beloved stuffed animals disappeared one by one, replaced with books Amy deemed age-appropriate. No tears when Daddy left for business, because crying is manipulation. Michelle watched Lily transform before her eyes. The girl who'd raced through hallways squealing with laughter now moved through the mansion like a ghost, each step careful, measured, silent. She stopped asking questions, stopped sharing stories from school, started asking permission for everything, permission to get a snack, permission to use the bathroom, permission to breathe too loudly, and she flinched. Every time Amy entered a room, Lily's small body would tense, her eyes would drop, her hands would still whatever they'd been doing. Michelle tried to tell herself she was overreacting, but then she started hearing things. You're so ungrateful. Do you know how lucky you are? Stop acting like a baby. You're embarrassing. Your father would be ashamed of how spoiled you've become. The words drifted through doorways, whispered when Thomas wasn't home. Michelle would find Lily on her hands and knees, scrubbing already spotless floors, or polishing silverware that didn't need polishing, or organizing books in alphabetical order, tasks assigned as punishment for infractions Michelle couldn't identify. One afternoon, Michelle gathered her courage. She found Amy in the study and spoke carefully, respectfully. Miss Valenzuela, I've noticed Lily seems anxious lately. She's only 8. Maybe she just needs a little more room to be a child? Amy's expression didn't change, but her eyes went arctic. Michelle. The name came out like a blade. You're here to clean and cook, not to parent. I suggest you stay in your lane. Michelle felt the warning like a hand around her throat. If you can't respect the boundaries of your position, Amy continued, her voice silk over steel, I'm sure Thomas would understand if we needed to find someone who could. The threat hung in the air between them. Michelle had worked for the Albury family for 6 years. She'd raised Lily as much as anyone, but Amy was Thomas's partner, and Michelle was just the help. If it came down to Amy's word against hers, Michelle knew who would lose. So she stayed silent, but she started keeping mental notes. Dates, times, things Amy said. The way Lily's laughter had vanished entirely, replaced by brittle smiles she manufactured whenever Thomas came home, desperate to convince her father everything was fine. Michelle felt powerless against Amy's hold over Thomas. He saw only what Amy allowed him to see, a loving partner, a child going through normal growing pains, a household running smoothly in his absence. The moment that broke Michelle's silence came on a gray afternoon in October. She found Lily standing at the bedroom window, staring out at nothing, holding the pieces of a broken ceramic unicorn, one of the last toys from her mother. Tears tracked silently down the girl's face. She said it was childish, Lily whispered. She threw it. Michelle knelt beside her, heart cracking. "Oh, sweetheart, if I'm good enough," Lily interrupted, her voice small and hollow. "She won't hate me, right?" Michelle looked into those 8-year-old eyes, saw the desperate hope there, the belief that somehow this was her fault, and something inside her snapped. She wouldn't look away anymore. Couldn't. Whatever it cost her, whatever risk it brought, Michelle Wright would not let this child disappear into silence while the adults around her stayed blind. If your heart just broke for Lily, drop a comment below. Tell me you see it too, how monsters don't always look like monsters. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You're part of this story now. Because what Michelle does next takes real courage. Michelle started documenting everything the day after Lily whispered about being good enough. She used her phone, kept on silent, angled carefully when Amy's back was turned. A photograph of finger-shaped bruises on Lily's upper arm, dark purple against pale skin, another of red marks on her wrist. She recorded audio through her bedroom door, Amy's voice sharp and venomous, berating Lily for breathing too loudly during a phone call, calling her pathetic and worthless. Michelle kept a small notebook hidden beneath her mattress, logging dates and times with clinical precision. October 3rd, 2:15 p.m. Lily denied lunch for talking back, asked if she could have a snack. October 7th, 4:30 p.m. Lily locked in bedroom for 3 hours, thinking about respect. October 12th, 6 p.m. Overheard your father deserves better than a burden like you. The abuse escalated in rhythm with Thomas's travel schedule. A territorial dispute required his presence in another city for 5 days. The moment his car disappeared down the driveway, Amy's mask crumbled completely. Food became leverage. Lily earned meals by completing impossible tasks, reciting multiplication tables without a single error, writing apology letters for manufactured infractions, standing silent in the corner for 30-minute intervals to learn discipline. Michelle watched the girl grow thinner, quieter, more hollow. Isolation became punishment. Lily spent entire afternoons locked in her bedroom, told she was unworthy of being part of the household until she could prove she'd changed. Through the door, Michelle could hear muffled crying that eventually gave way to silence. And then there were the lessons. Your father is a king in this city, Amy would say, her voice dripping false sweetness. Kings need queens, not needy little girls who remind them of dead wives. If you want to stay in his life, you need to earn it. Michelle recorded every word she could, her hands shaking with rage and helplessness. But Thomas was beginning to notice too. Lily had always called him when he traveled, excited updates about school, questions about when he'd be home, rambling stories that made him smile despite whatever dark business he'd been conducting. But during this trip, she called only once, her voice flat and careful, answering his questions in monosyllables before finding an excuse to hang up. Something felt wrong. When Thomas returned home 2 days early, unannounced, he walked into a scene that made his instincts flare. Lily was sitting rigidly at the dining table, back unnaturally straight, hands folded in her lap. The moment she saw him, her entire demeanor shifted, a smile plastered across her face, forced brightness flooding her voice. "Daddy, you're home." But he'd seen that split second before the mask, the tension in her small shoulders, the fear in her eyes. At dinner, he watched Amy's hand rest on Lily's shoulder, watched his daughter go statue still beneath that touch, watched Amy's fingers press just slightly too hard, knuckles white, while her face remained serene. "Lily's been such a good girl while you were away," Amy said warmly. Lily's smile never wavered, but Thomas saw her swallow hard. That night, Thomas lay awake, pieces clicking together in his mind. He'd spent decades reading people, detecting lies, sensing threats. Every instinct he'd honed on the streets was screaming that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong in his own home. Amy stood in Thomas's study after he'd gone to bed, staring at the wall of photographs. Thomas and Catherine on their wedding day. Catherine pregnant, glowing. Catherine holding newborn Lily. A dozen images of Lily at various ages, laughing, playing, radiating the love Thomas showered on her. Amy's reflection stared back at her from the glass, fury simmering beneath her composed expression. She hadn't sacrificed 3 years cultivating this relationship to remain second place to a dead woman and her needy child. Thomas Albury was supposed to be hers, his power, his empire, his undivided attention. She was meant to be the queen of his world, not some glorified babysitter competing with ghosts and a little girl who looked too much like her mother. Every photo was a reminder that she hadn't won. Not really, not completely, but she would. Lily was young, malleable, break her spirit enough, and eventually Thomas would see his daughter as the burden Amy kept insisting she was. Then there would be no competition, no divided loyalty, just Amy, finally holding the position she deserved. Thomas made a call the next morning to his security contractor. Casual, routine. Upgrade the audio monitoring. Every room. Tell me it's for intruder detection. The contractor didn't question it. Thomas Albury's paranoia had kept him alive this long. Within 48 hours, microphones were embedded throughout the mansion, feeding to encrypted servers only Thomas could access. He told no one, not his men, not Amy, not even Michelle. He just wanted to hear the truth. 3 days later, Michelle was in the upstairs hallway, phone hidden in her apron pocket, recording Amy's voice drifting from Lily's room, another lesson about gratitude and worthiness. She didn't hear Amy emerge until it was too late. Michelle spun, heart hammering. Amy stood 3 feet away, eyes cold and knowing. What are you doing? I was just dusting. Amy stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. This house is mine now. Everything in it. Everyone. Her smile was razor thin. Don't forget who can replace you. Michelle, 1 word from me, and you're gone. And who do you think Thomas will believe his partner? Or the help? Michelle's blood turned to ice as Amy brushed past her, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and unveiled threat hanging in the air. The afternoon started quietly, almost peacefully. Thomas had left for the city 3 hours earlier, his departure marked by a tight hug and whispered promise to Lily. I'll be home for dinner, sweetheart. We'll watch that movie you wanted. Lily had smiled one of her real smiles, the kind that was becoming rarer, and settled in the living room with her school project spread across the coffee table. The assignment was simple. Draw your family. She'd been working on it for an hour, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration, trying to get the details perfect. Her father in his dark suit, tall and protective. Her mother drawn from the photographs Lily studied every night, with long hair and a kind smile. And Amy, standing beside them, because maybe if Lily drew them all together, happy, it would somehow become real. Maybe if she could just be good enough, perfect enough, Amy would love her the way she used to, the way Lily desperately needed her to. She reached across the table for her red pencil, the one she needed for her mother's dress in the drawing. Her elbow caught the white vase. Time slowed as it tipped, wobbled, then plummeted toward the hardwood floor. The crash was deafening. Porcelain exploded across the living room, white shards scattering like shrapnel, water spreading in a dark stain across the rug. Lily's entire body went rigid, terror flooding her veins. No, 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 she whispered, dropping to her knees, hands shaking as she tried to gather the broken pieces. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll clean it. I'll fix it. Please. She heard the footsteps before she saw her. Amy appeared in the doorway, and the fury on her face made Lily's blood freeze. What did you do? Amy's voice was low, dangerous, trembling with barely contained rage. It was an accident, I swear. I didn't mean to. You never mean to. Amy strode across the room, her heels crunching over broken porcelain. You're useless. Absolutely useless. Do you know how much that vase cost? Do you know how hard I work to keep this house beautiful while you destroy everything you touch? I'm sorry. Lily's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. You're always sorry. Sorry doesn't fix anything. Amy's voice rose to a shout. You're stupid. Careless. A complete disaster just like your mother. The words hit like a physical blow. Lily's chest tightened, her breath coming in short, rapid gasps. The room tilted. Her lungs wouldn't expand properly. She clutched at her chest, trying to force air in, but it wouldn't come. Stop it, Amy snapped. Stop with the fake tears. You're not hurt. You're just dramatic. But Lily couldn't stop, couldn't breathe. The edges of her vision started to blur, panic overwhelming every rational thought. Her hands shook violently as she gasped, each attempted breath shallower than the last. Amy grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise, and shook her. I said, stop pretending. You're fine. Get up and clean this mess. Lily tried to speak, to explain she couldn't breathe, but no words would come. Only strangled gasps, desperate and terrifying. Michelle was in the kitchen when she heard the crash, followed immediately by Amy's shouting. Her entire body went cold. She dropped the dish towel and ran toward the living room. What she saw when she reached the doorway made her heart stop. Lily was on her knees amid the shattered vase, gasping like a drowning victim, face pale and streaked with tears. Her small hands clutched at her chest, eyes wide with terror, and Amy stood over her, still gripping the girl's arm, face twisted with rage. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't even abuse anymore. This was life-threatening. Miss Valenzuela. Michelle's voice came out sharp, urgent. She can't breathe. Amy's head snapped toward her. Stay in your place, Michelle. Look at her. Something's wrong. Let me handle my future stepdaughter. Amy's voice was vicious. She's manipulating you. Can't you see that? She does this for attention. But Lily wasn't manipulating anyone. She was collapsing, her small body folding as her knees gave out completely. She crumpled onto the floor, still fighting desperately for air that wouldn't come, her lips beginning to take on a frightening bluish tinge. Oh God, Michelle breathed. Oh God. No. She fumbled for her phone with shaking hands, nearly dropping it twice. Her vision blurred with tears as she pulled up Thomas's contact. Amy was still shouting something, but Michelle couldn't hear it over the roaring in her ears and Lily's horrible gasping attempts to breathe. She hit the call button. Please pick up, she whispered, watching Lily's small body trembling on the floor. Please pick up. The phone rang once, twice. Lily's eyes were starting to flutter closed. Pick up, Thomas. Pick up. The phone rang in the middle of Thomas's coldest negotiation in years. 12 men sat around the table, weapons barely concealed, waiting for his decision on whether territorial boundaries would be redrawn with words or bullets. He saw Michelle's name flash across the screen. His blood turned to ice. Michelle? He answered, already rising from his chair. Her voice came through broken, barely human. Sir Thomas, please come home. In the background, he could hear it. Desperate, choking gasps. A child, struggling for air. And Amy's voice, distant but sharp, shouting something he couldn't make out. She's not breathing, Michelle sobbed. Lily, she's not, oh God. Thomas, she's not breathing. The phone slipped from Thomas's hand before he even processed the words. He was already moving, shoving past his men, ignoring their questions, their protests. Nothing existed except the sound of his daughter choking and Michelle's terror-stricken voice. Behind him, someone called his name. He didn't hear it. He ran. The drive was a blur of red lights ignored, traffic split, tires screaming across asphalt. 7 minutes that felt like 7 hours, each second an eternity while his mind replayed Michelle's words on a vicious loop. She's not breathing. Flashbacks hit him in fragments, unwanted and visceral. Holding newborn Lily in the hospital, her mother's blood still on his hands, whispering promises he didn't know how to keep. The weight of her, so small and fragile, the only good thing left in his shattered world. The men he'd hunted down afterward, the revenge he'd taken, brutal and absolute, against everyone connected to Catherine's death, the things he'd done in that rage-fueled week that still haunted him in the dark hours before dawn. Standing over Lily's crib 3 days after Catherine's funeral, his daughter sleeping peacefully while he made a vow. No one will ever touch you because of me again. I swear it. I swear it. Every promise, every precaution, every wall he'd built. And still he'd failed her. He tore through the mansion doors, and the silence that greeted him was wrong, heavy, suffocating, unnatural. No cartoons, no music, no sound of life. Only Michelle's crying, somewhere deeper in the house. Thomas moved through the hallways, each step amplifying the dread pooling in his chest. The faint smell of broken ceramic hung in the air. The dimmed lighting of late afternoon cast long shadows across hardwood floors. He could hear Michelle now, whispering frantically, her voice hoarse. Stay with me, baby. Stay with me. Your dad's coming. He's coming. Thomas reached the living room doorway and froze. Lily was on the floor, surrounded by shattered white porcelain, her small body curled in on itself. Her face was pale, too pale, tear-streaked and terrified, Her hands clutched at her chest as she gasped desperately, each breath a horrible, strangled sound. Her eyes were wide with panic, unfocused, fighting for oxygen that wouldn't come. Amy stood near her, not kneeling, not helping. She was striding across the room in her sharp navy suit, fury still etched across her perfect features, as if the child suffocating on the floor was somehow inconveniencing her. Michelle was pressed against the wall, phone still clutched in trembling hands, tears streaming down her face, watching Lily with absolute horror. The tableau lasted only a heartbeat, but it burned itself into Thomas's memory like a brand. "Move," he said quietly. The single word carried enough lethal weight that Amy actually flinched. She stepped back. Thomas dropped to his knees beside Lily, gathering her into his arms, his hands gentle despite the violence coursing through his veins. "Breathe with me, baby," he murmured, his voice steady, even as his heart shattered. "In through your nose. Slow. I've got you. You're safe," he demonstrated, exaggerating each breath, making his chest rise and fall visibly. Lily's terrified eyes locked onto his face, trying to follow, but the panic had her in its grip. "Look at me, Lily. Just me. Nobody else. In, hold out. With me now." He kept his voice low, calm, anchoring her to his presence. Gradually, painfully, her gasps began to slow. The desperate choking eased into ragged breathing. Color started returning to her face. Lily clung to him, her small fingers digging into his shirt, whole body trembling. "I couldn't breathe," she whispered against his chest. "I broke the vase and Amy was so mad, and I tried, but I couldn't." Thomas held her tighter, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped protectively around her small frame. He could feel her heart hammering like a frightened bird's. When her breathing finally stabilized, when he was certain she wasn't in immediate danger, Thomas carefully stood, lifting Lily with him. He handed her to Michelle, who took the girl with shaking hands. "Take her upstairs," he said quietly. "Don't leave her alone." Michelle nodded, tears still streaming, and carried Lily toward the stairs. Thomas turned to face Amy. The transformation in him was absolute. The gentle father vanished, replaced by the man who'd built an empire on calculated violence. His eyes went cold, flat, empty of everything except controlled fury. "What?" he asked in a voice that had made hardened criminals confess to crimes they hadn't committed. "Did you do to my daughter?" Amy's composure cracked, but only for a second. She smoothed her expression, manufactured concern. "Thomas, thank God you're here." She had a tantrum, threw things, worked herself into hysterics. I tried to calm her, but she wouldn't listen. "She was suffocating on the floor," Thomas said quietly. "And you were standing over her, angry. I was trying to get her to stop faking. She does this for attention. Children don't fake asphyxiation. Thomas, you don't understand. I have recordings." Michelle's voice cut through from the stairway, hoarse but clear. Amy's head snapped toward her, face draining of color. "What?" Michelle descended 2 steps, jaw set, fear still evident but resolve stronger. "Videos, audio, photos, everything you've done to her, for weeks." Thomas's expression didn't change, but something deadly flickered behind his eyes. "Show me," he said. Thomas's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Marcus." His head of security appeared in the doorway within seconds, as if he'd been waiting. "Clear the house. All staff to the east wing. No one comes to this floor until I say otherwise." Thomas's eyes never left Amy. "Get Dr. Reeves here. Have him examine Lily in the guest room. Michelle stays with her until he arrives." Marcus nodded and disappeared. Thomas gestured toward the hallway. "My office. Now." Amy tried for tears, her eyes glistening prettily as she followed him. "Thomas, please, if you'd just let me explain. Save it." His office was dark wood and leather, walls lined with books that had never been read and art that cost more than most people earned in a year. He closed the door behind them with deliberate calm, then moved to stand behind his desk, the position of power, of judgment. Amy sat in one of the chairs facing him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I was only trying to discipline her. She's been so difficult lately, testing boundaries, and I thought, Michelle." Thomas's voice was ice. "Show me what you have." Michelle's hands shook as she pulled out her phone and the small notebook from her apron pocket. She'd imagined this moment 100 times, rehearsed what she'd say, but now that it was here, terror threatened to choke her. Amy could have her fired, could turn Thomas against her, could. But then she thought of Lily gasping on the floor, and the fear dissolved into something harder. I have photos, Michelle said quietly, placing her phone on Thomas's desk. Bruises, audio recordings, dates and times in this notebook. Everything she's done to Lily for the past 6 weeks. Thomas picked up the phone, scrolling through images. Michelle watched his jaw tighten, a muscle jumping near his temple, but his expression remained eerily controlled. He pressed play on the first audio file. Amy's voice filled the room, crystal clear and venomous. You're pathetic. Do you know that? Your father works so hard, and you're nothing but a burden on him. A constant, whining, needy burden. Lily's small voice, trembling. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't change what you are. You're not special, Lily. You're a reminder of his biggest mistake. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas set the phone down very carefully, his movements precise. When he looked up, his eyes were dead calm, the most dangerous version of himself. Amy laughed nervously. Thomas, you can't possibly believe Michelle's jealous. She's always been possessive of Lily, wanting your attention, wanting to be more than just staff. Keep talking, Thomas said quietly. She doesn't understand. I was raised differently. European standards are stricter. Children need discipline, structure, not coddling. Michelle, Thomas interrupted. Leave us. Go to Lily. Michelle hesitated, glancing between them, then fled. The moment the door closed, Thomas opened his laptop and turned it to face Amy. 3 weeks ago, I upgraded our security system, he said conversationally. Added audio monitoring to every room. For intruder threats, I told my tech team. Amy's face went white. Thomas pressed a key. His own voice filled the room, a recording from the hidden system. Amy's words echoing through invisible speakers. Stop crying. You're weak. Just like your mother was weak. Is that why she got herself killed? Because she was too stupid to stay out of the way? Lily's sobs in the background. Desperate and broken. Your father would be ashamed of you. Do you hear me? Ashamed. Thomas played another clip. And another. Amy's voice twisting through threat after threat, insult after insult. Lily's crying. The sound of something breaking. Amy forcing the child to apologize for existing. No ambiguity. No room for misinterpretation. Just the truth, recorded in Amy's own voice. That's... Amy stood abruptly, her composure finally shattering. That's taken out of context. You don't understand what it's like. Dealing with her all day, she manipulates. She lies. She's 8 years old. She's competition. The words exploded out of Amy before she could stop them. Everything in this house is about her or your dead wife. I've given you 3 years, and I'm still living in Catherine's shadow, raising her spoiled daughter, listening to you talk about how perfect she was. So you tortured a child. I tried to teach her to know her place. Amy's voice rose, all pretense of sweetness gone. You were supposed to see how difficult she was, how much easier your life could be without constantly catering to a needy brat. You broke her spirit to make room for yourself in my life. She was in the way. Amy's face was flushed now, fury and desperation warring for dominance. I'm supposed to be your queen, not some glorified stepmother competing with ghosts. Thomas opened a drawer in his desk, pulled out a thick manila folder, and placed it between them. Do you remember signing this? He asked quietly. Amy glanced at it, confusion flickering across her face. The financial agreements. Yes. Did you read Clause 17? Her confusion deepened. I don't. You should have read everything you signed, Amy. Something in his tone made the blood drain from her face. Thomas opened the folder and slid a document across the desk. Clause 17, he said, his voice deadly calm. Any act of physical or psychological harm inflicted upon Lily Alberry by the secondary party will result in immediate forfeiture of all financial provisions, gifts, accounts, and protections outlined in this agreement. Amy stared at the page, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror. All assets revert to me or to trusts established for Lily. Thomas continued, each word measured and precise. Every account I opened for you, every piece of jewelry, the car, the credit cards, the allowance, everything. He leaned forward slightly. You hurt my daughter, you lose everything. You can't. Amy's voice cracked. You wouldn't. I already have. Thomas gestured to the laptop, still playing silent testimony of her cruelty. The recordings are evidence. Michelle's documentation is evidence. The bruises, doctor. Reeves is photographing right now. Our evidence. Amy shot to her feet, the chair scraping violently across the floor. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're protecting her. You brought me into this house. You were so desperate for someone to play happy family that you never once questioned whether I actually wanted to raise another woman's child. Then you should have said no, Thomas replied quietly. Instead, you said yes and tortured an 8-year-old girl because you couldn't compete with a ghost. I shouldn't have had to compete. Amy's voice rose to a shriek. I gave you 3 years. 3 years of living in the shadow of St. Catherine and her precious daughter. Everything in this house is a shrine to them, the photos, the stories, your pathetic guilt. So you decided to break Lily's spirit to make room for yourself in my life. She was in my way. The confession exploded out of her, raw and venomous. I was supposed to be your queen, Thomas. The only woman in your world. But no, every decision, every moment, every ounce of your attention goes to that needy little brat or the memory of your dead wife. You married me for power, Thomas said, his voice cutting through her rage like a scalpel. Not love, not family, power. Of course I did, Amy laughed bitterly. You're Thomas Albury. Being with you means status, protection, influence, everything I deserved. But I can't have any of it while playing second fiddle to a child. You competed with my daughter for my attention, Thomas continued, his tone unnervingly calm. And when you couldn't win, you tried to destroy her. Amy's face twisted. I tried to teach her reality, that she's not special, that she's just a burden you're too weak to let go of. Thomas stood slowly, his full height and presence suddenly dominating the room. You tried to break her because of your own insecurity, because you knew, deep down, that you would never matter to me the way she does. The truth of it hit Amy like a slap. For a moment, she stood frozen, then fury overtook her completely. She lunged across the desk, nails aimed at his face, a scream tearing from her throat. Thomas caught her wrists easily, his grip iron. I'll destroy you, she spat. I'll go to the police, the FBI, every news outlet in the city. I'll expose everything, your deals, your crimes, your dirty money. Do it. Thomas's voice was soft, almost gentle, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Burn my empire to the ground if you want. I'll take that risk before I let you near my daughter ever again. He released her wrists and pressed a button on his desk phone. Marcus appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 other guards. Miss Valenzuela is leaving, Thomas said. Permanently. Escort her out. She takes nothing but the clothes she's wearing. You can't do this. Amy's voice cracked, desperation bleeding through the rage. Thomas, please. I'm sorry. I'll change. You had 3 years to change. You chose cruelty instead. Marcus moved forward. Amy tried to dodge around him, reaching for Thomas, her expression cycling between fury and manufactured tears. I loved you. I gave you everything. You gave me nothing, Thomas said quietly. And you tried to take everything that mattered. The guards took Amy's arms, not roughly, but with absolute finality. She fought, screaming threats and pleas in equal measure, her composure shattered completely. As they dragged her toward the door, Michelle appeared in the hallway, Lily safely upstairs with the doctor. She stood silently, a witness to the end. You'll regret this, Amy shrieked as they pulled her down the hallway. All of you. Her voice faded as they reached the front entrance. Thomas moved to the window, watching as the guards escorted Amy through the gates. She turned back once, still screaming something he couldn't hear through the glass. Then the iron gates swung shut with a definitive clang. She was gone. Thomas stood motionless for a long moment, then turned to Michelle, who lingered uncertainly in the doorway. Thank you, he said quietly, for protecting her when I was too blind to see. Michelle's eyes filled with tears. I should have told you sooner. You did what you could. Against someone like her, that took courage. He paused. She'll never come near Lily again. You have my word. Michelle nodded, relief and exhaustion written across her face. Thomas moved past her, climbing the stairs to the guest room. He paused in the doorway. Lily was asleep, Dr. Reeves having given her something mild to help her rest. Her breathing was steady now, even, peaceful. The color had returned to her cheeks. She looked so small in the large bed, clutching a stuffed rabbit Michelle must have brought her. Thomas leaned against the doorframe, watching his daughter breathe, and the weight of what he'd almost lost crashed over him. He'd survived wars with rival families, assassination attempts, FBI investigations, years of violence that would have broken lesser men. But he'd almost lost Lily not to bullets or enemies or the dangers of his world, to his own blindness. his own failure to see the monster he'd invited into their home. Never again. He made the promise silently, watching her chest rise and fall. Never again. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Stories like this aren't easy, but they're necessary. Subscribe if you believe that real love protects, even when it's hard. Comment below if you've ever had to be Michelle, the one who spoke up when no one else would. Let's finish this together. 3 months later, the mansion felt different. It took Thomas weeks to identify what had changed, and when he finally did, the realization made his chest tighten with relief he hadn't known he'd been holding. There was laughter again. Real laughter, not the brittle manufactured sounds Lily had produced to please Amy, but genuine giggles that bubbled up freely and echoed through the halls. The sound of small feet running, no longer tiptoeing. The television playing cartoons at full volume without apology. His daughter was coming back to life. Lily saw Dr. Chen twice a week, a child psychologist Thomas had vetted more thoroughly than he'd ever vetted a business partner. The sessions were slow, careful work. Lily was learning that her feelings weren't too much, that mistakes didn't equal disaster, that love shouldn't require perfection. Some days were harder than others. She still flinched occasionally at raised voices, still asked permission before doing things that shouldn't require it. But the progress was undeniable. Last week, she'd run down the hallway chasing a balloon, then stopped abruptly, eyes wide with fear. Thomas had found her frozen mid-step. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Am I allowed to run?" Her voice had been so small. He'd knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Lily, this is your home. You can run, laugh, make noise, make messes. You can be exactly who you are. Always. Even if I'm too loud? There's no such thing as too loud. Not for you. Not ever." She'd searched his face for signs of a lie, found none, and smiled tentatively at first, then wider. Then she'd taken off running again, and Thomas had stood in the hallway listening to her laughter with something close to prayer in his chest. Thomas had restructured everything. He delegated the violent operations to trusted lieutenants, pulling himself back from the bloodiest edges of his empire. The meetings that used to run until midnight now ended by 6. He'd made it clear to every person in his organization. Evenings were for Lily. Boundaries were non-negotiable. Some of his men had questioned the change. Once, they didn't question it twice. Thomas discovered he didn't need to be present for every decision, every territorial dispute, every power play. His empire ran smoothly with him at a distance. And the time he gained the evenings with Lily, the unhurried breakfasts, the movie nights, those were worth more than any deal he'd ever closed. Michelle's role in the household had shifted too. Thomas had given her a substantial raise, moved her into better quarters in the house, and made it explicitly clear to his security team. Michelle Wright was under his personal protection. Anyone who threatened her would answer to him directly. But more than that, her relationship with Lily had evolved beyond employer and employee. She was family now, the aunt who knew Lily's favorite foods, who could calm her nightmares, who sat with her during the hard therapy sessions when Thomas couldn't be there. One evening, Thomas found them in the kitchen together, Michelle teaching Lily to bake cookies. Lily's hands were covered in dough, flour dusted across her nose, and she was giggling at something Michelle had said. Neither of them noticed him watching from the doorway, and he didn't interrupt. Some moments were too precious to intrude upon. The conversation about Catherine came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Lily had been looking at old photographs, something Dr. Chen had encouraged when she asked the question Thomas had been dreading. "Daddy? Was Mommy weak? Is that why she died?" Thomas's blood had run cold. He recognized Amy's poison, still lingering. He'd sat beside Lily on the floor, pulled her into his lap, and told her the truth, not the sanitized version, but the real one. "Your mother was the bravest person I ever knew," he said quietly. "She knew what my life was like, knew the dangers, and she loved us anyway. She wasn't weak, Lily. She was strong enough to love without conditions, and what happened to her wasn't her fault. It was mine. But you didn't shoot her. No, but the bullet was meant for me." He took a breath. "I've spent years trying to make up for that, trying to keep you safe from my world. Sometimes I got it wrong." Lily had been quiet for a long moment, then whispered. "Amy said Mommy was stupid. Amy lied about a lot of things. Do you still love Mommy?" "Every day," Thomas said honestly. "And that doesn't mean there's less love for you. Love doesn't work like that. It grows." Lily had nodded against his chest, and Thomas had held her until she fell asleep in his arms. Late one night, Thomas sat alone in his office, reviewing the security footage one final time. Amy's voice echoed through the speakers, cruel and cold. while Lily's small form tried desperately to meet impossible standards. He watched it all the way through, forcing himself to see every moment he'd missed, every sign he'd ignored. Then he deleted everything. The house wouldn't be a prison of terrible memories. The recordings had served their purpose. Amy was gone, the clause invoked, the legal protections in place. Keeping the evidence would only mean living in the past. Thomas shut the laptop and made himself a promise. He would never again mistake control for protection. Never again would he assume that walls and weapons could guard against every threat. Sometimes the enemy didn't carry guns. Sometimes it wore a smile and called itself family. The final evening of that week, Thomas found Lily asleep on the living room couch, a movie still playing softly on the television. She was curled under a blanket, her breathing slow and steady, peaceful. He stood in the doorway, just watching her breathe. Michelle appeared beside him, her own expression soft with relief. "She's breathing," Michelle said quietly. Thomas didn't take his eyes off his daughter. "As long as I'm alive, she always will be." It was a promise, a vow, the same one he'd made years ago over a crib, but this time he understood what it truly meant. Protection wasn't just walls and guards and weapons. It was seeing, listening, believing a child when her behavior screamed what her words couldn't say. In a world of shadows and betrayal, Thomas had learned the hardest lesson of his life. The deadliest monsters don't always carry guns or wear their violence openly. Sometimes they walk through your front door wearing a smile, speaking softly, hiding their cruelty behind closed doors. But when real love finally sees the truth, when it breaks through the blindness and recognizes the threat, it doesn't hesitate. It doesn't forgive. It protects. Always.